Good evening. Tonight's shiur, as usual, Ilu Nishmat Avi Murray, Dober Ben Yuval Levi, Imam Marti Baruch Abad Harav Michael. Also, should be the zechut for all of our chayalim that they should be Hashem should watch over them, and that the shivuyim should be safe and should come home soon safely. All of them. Tonight we are going to talk about parshat Vayaytzay, and interestingly enough, parshat Vayaytzay. One second. So as I was saying, this week we read parshat Vayaytzay, and interestingly enough, parshat Vayaytzay in the Torah is written as a single chapter. There are no a single paragraph. There are no paragraph breaks in the entire parsha as it's written in the Torah. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. So before we start, the bulk of the parsha, of course, talks about the story of Yaakov and Lavan, and that's what we're going to focus on tonight. The beginning of the parsha, of course, is the story of Yaakov's dream. We're going to skip over that. We're also going to skip in the middle of the parsha the whole story about how Yaakov's interaction with his wives and and all the children are born. We're going to skip that. We're going to focus primarily on the interactions between Yaakov and Lavan. But I wanted to begin with a very simple quote that we're all very familiar with from the Pesach Haggadah, which is basically a verse in Dvarim when we bring the Bikurim. The person who brings the Bikurim is to recite the following passage. I'm only focusing on the first three words, Arami Oved Avi, which the Bal Haggadah translates as Lavan tried to destroy Yaakov. And Rashi quotes that right here. This is in Dvarim. This is Rashi in Dvarim. Arami Ovid Ovid Maskir Chaste Hamakom. The person who is bringing the Bikurim has to retell and remember the kindness that Hashem did for us. Arami Ovid Avi, that Lavan bikesh lakoret hakol. Lavan wanted to destroy Am Yisrael, and when he ran after Yaakov. Now, interestingly enough, Rashi there adds a little insight to our Haggadah recitation. As I said, we're familiar with that phrase, Lavan bikesh lakoret hakol from the Haggadah. Ubishvil shechashav la'asod. Lavan only thought to destroy, to do something. Chashav la'kadosh baruch hu ki'ilu asa. But again, Hashem counts an evil thought for his people as if they've already done it. She'umot ha'olam. That concerning Goyim who want to do harm to Am Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu considers it as if they have already done it, just because they want to do it. Interesting enough, we have a very opposite phrase in terms of when it comes to doing mitzvot. If somebody thought to do a mitzvah and they were prevented by some unforeseen circumstance from performing that mitzvah, Hashem nonetheless gives them credit for the thought of wanting to do the mitzvah. So we see it interestingly that Hashem, when one has a thought, a strong enough thought that they want to do something, it can count, at least in the heavenly accounting. So it's something we need to bear in mind as we go through our daily lives, daily activities, that it all begins with our thoughts. Our actions, we don't do things automatically. We first think about doing them, then we might discuss them with others to do, and then we ultimately do them. So there's a three-pronged approach to how we actually do things as human beings. First, we think about them, we plan them out, then we discuss those plans and bounce them off others often, not always, sometimes we don't, but then we actually do them. So again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who can read our thoughts and knows about what we're thinking, also takes all of those things into account. I think that's one of the messages that we're going to see I saw as a message from the parsha as we go through it. Now, I'm going to start with the beginning of now I'm going to skip the first chapter, which talks about Yaakov's dream and the angels. We're going to go immediately to the story to give us a little background for the interaction between Yaakov and Lavan. So let's go to the parsha here. This is beginning of chapter 29 in Breshit. And again, as I said, in the Torah, this is a continuation. Yaakov's dream is part of the same exact chapter in the Torah, all of which begins with when Yaakov leaves Eretz Yisrael, and it ends at the end of our parasha with Yaakov re-entering Eretz Yisrael, or on his way back to re-enter Eretz Yisrael. So it begins with Vayaytzay Yaakov Raglov. Yaakov lifts up his feet. Vayelach Artzav, and he walks to the land toward the east. Vayar, and he sees V'nei be'er basadeh. There is a well in a field. V'nei sham shlosha beitzon rovsim aleh. There are three shepherds, three groups of sheep who are hovering over the well. Because this was the well from which all of the flocks would water. When Yaakov arrives there, there is a large stone on top of the well. The reason the large stone seems to be on the well is very simply that there is a water shortage. Water rationing is operative in this district. They don't want people taking too much water out of this well. And the only way they can enforce that is by having this huge boulder on top of the well, which requires the strength of all of the shepherds to lift it. When all of the shepherds have gathered together, then and only then can they roll the stone or this boulder off of the top of the well. And then they water each of the flocks so that everybody can watch each other and make sure nobody's taking too much. And then they return this boulder on top of the well to where it belongs. So that's background. Now, one of the interesting things about this chapter, this parsha, is we're going to see a lot of dialogue. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to outline and highlight in different colors the different speakers. Yaakov is always going to be in green. We're going to see later on, we're going to see blue is going to be Lavan, and purple here is the shepherds that he meets and the short dialogue he has with them. But it's interesting the amount of ink that the Torah spends in this parsha to make us feel like we're there, like we're witnessing this story as it's unfolding in terms of dialogue, not only in terms of actions, what's going on, but there's going to be a lot of dialogue. So the first thing is Yaakov says to them, Achai, my brothers, where do you come from? They say, they answer him back. He asked them, Lavan ben Nachor. Now I've highlighted Lavan ben Nachor here in yellow because it's interesting. If we go back, we know that Lavan's father was not Nachor. Lavan's father was Betuel, Nachor's son. And yet, Yaakov asked them whether they know Lavan ben Nachor, not Lavan ben Betuel, which we would have thought he would have said, Lavan ben Betuel. So the commentaries want to say that Lavan wanted himself to be associated with Nachor. Nachor was perhaps more prominently known and more widely known as an elder statesman who happened to be Avraham's brother, and Avram presumably was well known. So perhaps Lavan wanted to have a more well-known family connection. But that's the way Yaakov asks them. Yes. Would it be like Israel, then Nachor as there's nobody else throughout the Tanakh who is called a Ben Nachor. There's nowhere else that Ben Nachor applies other than when Nachor has Betuel and he has his children. His children are listed genealogically. Lavan is the only one called Arami other than Betuel, his father, throughout the entire Torah. There are only two people who are called Arami, Lavan and his father Betuel. But Nachor is never called Arami. But again, Lavan is the only one who seems to want to have this title. At least Yaakov gives him this title, Ben Nachor. And we're going to see later on, Nachor will get mentioned sort of toward the end. Gets another mention. The rest of the time, he's just Lavan. Vayomer, the shepherds answer, Yadanu. They answer very, very tersely. Yaakov asks them a very simple question, and the answer is a very terse
whenever it's ready.
Excuse me. David, can you please mute? Thank you. Vayomru Yadanu, and they say, we are aware. Yadanu, we know him. That's all they say. They don't volunteer any information. Vayomer lahem, so he asked them a further question. Hashalom lo, is he at peace? Are you at peace with him? Vayomru shalom, and they don't answer shalom. They say shalom. Yeah, shalom. One word. But they also add a piece of information. Rachel b'to ba'ayim atzon. You see that lady over there coming with the sheep? That's Rachel, his daughter. Okay? Anything else you want to find out about him? We're not telling you. So Yaakov figures, okay, he's not going to get any more information about Lavan from them. He asks them a different question. He says, wait a minute, it's early in the day. There's a lot of time left in the day for the sheep to be grazing. Why are you collecting them now to give them water? They should be out in the field grazing. By Yomru, they answer him very, very straightforward answer. Lo nuchal, we can't give them water now so they continue to graze. We have to wait till all the flocks gather in order to be able to roll this boulder off of the well. And then we all feed the sheep, and then presumably they don't answer after that, and then we'll go back out to pasture. They don't say that, but they just give them the reason why they are not giving the sheep that have arrived water and taking them back out to pasture. Because they say we have to wait till everybody gathers. Now it's interesting, the Torah already told us that when it introduced the fact that there was a well with a block over it. But here again, the Torah adds it again to give it the depth, to the meaning to the story, that the shepherds are the ones saying this, that we need everybody here to move this boulder. So we see that again, the dialogue helps move the story along. He's still speaking. Rachel arrives at the well. Because she is the shepherdess. Now we know the story where Yaakov sees Rachel. Interestingly enough, she's introduced very, very interestingly. Yaakov at Rachel. Who is Rachel? Bat Lavan achi imo. She is the daughter of Lavan. Who is Lavan? His mother's brother. That's so Lavan achi imo. And again, it says the sheep of Lavan. Who is Lavan once again? Achi imo, his mother's brother. Vayigash Yaakov. Now what happens? Yaakov steps forward. Vayagel Teven al Piaber, single-handedly removes the boulder from the well. Vayash Getzon Lavan achi imo. And again, notice 3 times in this pasuk, it tells us that Lavan is achi imo. It mentions Lavan and this is the only time in the Torah where it says Lavan achi imo. This one pasuk, but it's mentioned 3 times. 3 times it's mentioned to emphasize the fact that Yaakov realizes that he is now doing a favor for his kinsman. And that's where he wanted to be anyway. He wanted to find Lavan anyway. As he asked them, we got to find him. Then he kisses Rachel and he raises his voice and cries. Vayaged Yaakov LaRachel. Yaakov tells Rachel, because she's totally perplexed, to this stranger who just rolled this boulder, this huge boulder that it took all the shepherds to move. He single-handedly rolled it off the well and gave all her sheep water. And she's probably perplexed what's going on. Vayaged Yaakov suddenly tells her that he is her father's brother. He is Rivka's son. And what does she do? She immediately goes and tells her father that her cousin showed up at the well. Yaakov ben Achoto, when Lavan hears about this news about Yaakov, his sister's son has arrived, he runs to greet him. By the way, interestingly enough, we have the same phrase 2 parashot ago when Eliezer shows up at the well, and Rivka it says Vayotz Lavan ha'ish achutza el ha'ayin. Again, Lavan runs. So Lavan runs to greet him. Vayichabiklo, he gives him a big hug. Vayanashiklo, he kisses him. Vayivi'eu el beito, he brings him into the house. Now, if I were to stop there, just reading that pasuk up to that point, what's your take on Lavan? What is your impression that you get? Who is this Lavan? Oh, what a nice guy. He gives him the royal greeting. He gives him the big hug, the big kisses. He brings him into the house. No questions asked. Vayisaper Lavan et kol hadvarim ha'ela. Yaakov relates to Lavan all the things that have happened to him. Okay, and Rashi will get into the parshat. What is it that Yaakov relates to Lavan? We'll see in a minute. So now Lavan responds. Vayomer lo Lavan. Lavan responds to whatever Yaakov told him. Ach atzmi uvesari ata. But you're my brother. You're my flesh and blood. Vayeshev imo chodesh yamim. And he stays with Lavan for a full month. Think about it. Okay, some guy shows up at your doorstep, says he's your nephew, and you hose him, put him up in your house for a full month for nothing. Nothing said. If I stop the story right here, this Lavan sounds like a pretty nice guy. He gave him, quote, a free room, certainly. I'm assuming they gave him room and board for a full month. But now the story, we find something else. Vayomer Lavan leYaakov. Lavan tells Yaakov, Hachi, is it because you are my brother, you should work for me for free? Tell me, what is your wage? What do you want me to pay you? So the question we have to ask, if Lavan is saying that, what does it mean? Was Yaakov already working for him for free? What does that mean? Or was he, again, only working for a room and board up until this point? So we don't know. But again, the fact that Lavan seems to want to keep him where he is, to keep him aboard, because he sees something that is going on with this guy. Either he's an industrious guy and he works very well and he's whatever it is, but for some reason Lavan says, "Hey, let's keep this guy. I better tie him down to a contract here. Find out what he wants. He's not going to keep working for free forever, just for room and board." Now, Torah has two parenthetical verses here. Lavan has two daughters. One is Leah, one is Rachel. Leah's eyes were rakot, whatever that means. Rachel, and Rachel is very beautiful. And what it says, of course, Yaakov falls in love with Rachel. Vayomer. So he says to Lavan. Now, all that is parenthetical. Lavan Shebano, all of this was parenthetical. The white part here. Suddenly, so his answer to Lavan, when Lavan asks, "What do you want to pay me to pay you?" He says, I am willing to work for you for 7 years in order to have Rachel, your younger daughter. That's what he says. Vayomer Lavan, Lavan's answer is straightforward. Fine, she's yours. Rather give her to a kinsman than to somebody else. Shva imadi. So stay here. Vayavod Yaakov Rachel sheva shanim. Yaakov works for Rachel. He's not really. See, it's an interesting phraseology of the words. It says, Yaakov birachel. Yaakov works for Rachel. But he's not working for Rachel. He's working for Lavan. And the payment is Rachel, to be a chol. Sheva shanim. So he works 7 years. But it's an interesting construct for the pasuk. It says Yaakov worked for Rachel. He doesn't with Rachel. No, birachel can mean in Rachel, for Rachel, with Rachel can mean a lot of things. But clearly, Rachel was not the employer. That's my point. But the employer here is Lavan. Rachel is the wage. Sheva shanim. Well, Rachel is the wages that he's working for. That's what he wants. Sheva shanim. In other words, presumably this is the deal they made, and that's what it is. Now, interestingly enough, the Torah gives a very interesting phrase. And they seemed in his eyes like only a few days. For his great love for Rachel, the time seemed to go by very quickly, which seems perhaps counterintuitive. When you're in love with somebody, every day seems like forever. But how 7 years can go by quickly, I don't know. But it did, obviously. Gershon.
Lavan had his own. He says, well, the 7 years, 7 years will begin after. I'll give you 7 years.
No. Lavan, Gershon is suggesting that Lavan at the beginning is his idea is that this I will give Rachel for you for 7 years, starting whenever I determine that it should start. But that's not the intent, because if that were the case, Lavan would have said that later on. Now, Lavan's intent is, that's what you said. Fine, I'll give her to you. I didn't say when I'll give her to you, perhaps, right? But yeah, sounds like a deal for me. So when
Why chose a year?
there's no David asks, there's no indication of why he chose 7 years. Why he chose 7 years, I have no idea why he chose 7 years. Other than, again, I will tell you that Rashi quotes a midrash, by the way, that says Vayiyu be'einav ki yamim achadim. They were in his eyes like yamim achadim. Rivka, when she sends Yaakov to Lavan, says Yashavta imo yamim achadim. You should stay with him for yamim achadim. Now, did she specifically set a time frame for how much yamim achadim is? I don't know. Maybe, perhaps, that Rivka said, it'll take Ace of 7 years or so to calm down. I don't know. I have no idea. I doubt it. But why he chooses 7 years? Is it related to Shemitah? Is it related? That's a great question. I would have loved to have been there with Yahweh, and since Yaakov, why'd you pick the number 7 years? Again, perhaps, and this is perhaps, that the dowry for a mate was 7 years' work. I don't know. Is that a standard? I don't know. I've never seen anybody who suggests that. Never seen anybody who asks the question, why did he pick 7 years? Because if he'd have picked 5 years, we would have asked, why did he pick 5 years? If he'd have picked 10 years, we would have said, why did he pick 10 years? No matter what he would have picked, we would have said, where did he get that number from? He's not a young man. The reason David's asking was he's not a young man. Yes, he wants to get married already. Yeah, I mean, again, 7 years would be a long time for somebody who's past, I don't know, in middle age and isn't married yet. Yes, I would think so. I would tend to agree that 7 years is a long time. Especially if you're waiting to have kids. I mean, look, Sarah and Avram were waiting for kids for a lot longer than seven years, as were Yitzchak and Rivka for longer than 7 years. However, having said that, neither Avraham nor Yitzchak were as old as Yaakov is at this point, at least according to the traditional chronology. We really don't have a great way of knowing how old the Yaakov was, other than relying on a lot of inferences that are drawn from different stages in his life. But not that those aren't valid inferences, but again, the traditional chronology, which the Gemara gives at the end of the first parak of Megillah, tells us that Yaakov, at the time he reaches Lavan's house, is already 77 years old. Wow. Okay, 77 already. So he's got a little bit of little tread on the tire, and we don't know how old Rachel and Leah were. There's nowhere, I shouldn't say there's nowhere. There's one parshat who suggests something about the age of Rachel and Leah related to their shepherding qualities or not qualities, but I may or may not get to that Ramban later on. No, that's Rivka is supposedly 3. Although there is, again, Ramban brings an opinion that Rachel was young, and that's why Lavan wasn't afraid to send her out to be a shepherd. He wasn't afraid that she would be molested. That's Ramban. I think that's Ramban brings that down. I don't remember who he brings it down from, whether it's his own or whatever. But the point of the matter is that Yaakov is not a young man. He's not as young as we might have thought he was. Let's put it that way. Okay. So Yaakov says to Lavan, okay, Lavan, 7 years are up. I'd like to have my wife now. Thank you. I paid for it. Let me have her. But yes, so Lavan had called on Shama, called my ass Mishtel. Lavan says, oh, hey, we're getting married. We got to have a big party here. He gets everybody together. Vahiba Erev. In the night of the wedding, what does he do? Vaikachet Leah Bito. He takes Leah, his daughter. Vayaveo Toi Love, and he brings Leah in. Vayavoy Leah. Now remember, she's got a veil on, probably a rather heavy Middle Eastern veil on. Probably you can't tell who's who. And again, they're two sisters. They probably, the impression we get is they probably had similar builds, similar whatever. And he brings Leah in. Gives her a maiden. There was certainly not street lighting. Again, they would be brought in with 2 candles. With whoever's escorting the bride and groom is holding a candle to make sure they don't trip on the way in. Correct, presumably. So again, there's the ability to recognize. We don't know. We assume that you go. By the way, today we have an entire ceremony based on this whole story called a bedekin, where we make sure that the chatan knows who his kala is by being the one who puts the veil over before the chuppah. Okay, but that's a different story. That's now. This is then. Now, interestingly enough, it says Vahiba Boker Vinei Leah. Yaakov doesn't realize it's Leah until the next morning. Vayomer El Lavan. He says to Lavan. Now again, we're going to get to Vayomer El Lavan. Mazod Asitali. What is that? What did you do? Halab Rachel Avadtimach. V'lamar Mitani. I worked for you for Rachel. Why did you deceive me and give me Leah? I didn't ask for Leah. I asked for Rachel. Vayomer Lavan, and Lavan's excuse is Lo Ye'asachein bimkomeinu latet hatzira lifnei habechira. Rules in this community are very strict about marrying a younger daughter before an old daughter. That doesn't happen. You want the younger daughter. Part of the deal is if you're taking the younger daughter, you got to find a husband for the older daughter. Well, you didn't, so I assume that meant you wanted her too. That's his excuse. It's not, by the way, I intended to give you Leah all along. I assume, well, 7 years. I got 7 years to find somebody else to marry her. Well, nobody came forward. I didn't marry her off in 7 years. Now you're stuck with her. That's the house rule. That's the house rules, or the place rules, is that you want the younger daughter, you got to take the older daughter too. Sorry about that. That's part of the way it works. But I'll make you a deal, Lavan says. Malay Shavuot, okay, fill this week. I will also give Rachel to you on condition or on account that you'll work for me for another 7 years. I will give you Rachel on account of the next 7 years' work. Why? Because Lavan knows if Yaakov says he'll do it, he'll do it. He's not worried about Yaakov cheating him back. He's very sure that Yaakov will work for the 7 years. Vayas Yaakov Cain. Yaakov says, okay. They fill out the week. And he gets married to Rachel also. She gets a shivcha. He works for the next 7 years. Now, the next section I skipped entirely. This is the next section. Hashem sees what's going on, and there are a bunch of children born, and I skipped all the children born. But finally, we get to the end where Rachel finally has a child. He's named Yosef, and we'll continue the story here. When Rachel finally gives birth to Yosef, Yaakov says to Lavan, it's time for me to go. Send me, I'm going back to my place, my land. So interestingly enough, even though, now, by the way, it's based on this verse that Yaakov says to Lavan, it's time for me to leave. When Yosef is born, that we figure out the dating of Yaakov's life, because clearly the 14 years have now ended. So Yosef is born at the end of the 14 years. And working back from Yaakov's age when he gets to Egypt, that's how we figured out he was 77 when he got to Lavan. So clearly, there is some connection, it seems, at least Rashi will tell us, that there's a connection between Yosef's birth and Yaakov finally saying, okay, it's time to go home. Obviously, the very simple connection is the fact that 14 years are over. It's finished. He's paid love on his debt. He wants to go home. Why? Tonight, Nashai give me my wives and my sons. That I worked for you for them. When I will go. Because you are well aware of the labor that I put in on your behalf. So Yaakov is saying to Lavan very simply, time's up, I'm going home. So even though Yaakov has now spent 14 years and all of his children have been born, he's had 11 sons and 1 daughter born to him in this short period of time. And according to Midrash, that each of the sons had a twin sister with him, there were 23 kids and 4 wives. He's got a big family now. He's got to worry about feeding. How is he going to feed them? How is he going to house them? How is he going to clothe them? How is he going to pay for his yeshiva tuition for all of these kids, right? So he's got to go earn a parnasa now. But Yomer, I love Lavan, but Lavan says, wait a minute, before you go, hold on a second. If I have found favor in your eyes, nichashti, I have checked things out here with my sources, with my mystical sources, and I realized that Hashem has blessed me on your behalf. Because before you got here, I was a nobody. Now I've seem to be doing okay. And it must be because Hashem has blessed me because I'm housing you, I'm taking care of you, so Hashem has blessed me. So Vayomar Nakvas Farcha Alai V'Tena. So Lavan is so anxious to keep Yaakov. Now, presumably, again, you'll notice that Vayomer, we have Vayomer twice in two psukim consecutively without the speaker changing. Normally, that means that there is some type of gap in the conversation. Otherwise, it wouldn't say Vayomar. Why we wouldn't have to love? In other words, it wouldn't say Vayomer that Lavan said. It would just continue. Nakvas Farcha Alai V'Tena. The fact that it's repeating the word Vayomer means either Yaakov, he could tell by looking at Yaakov that Yaakov was not intending to stay, that he really meant he was leaving, and he figured I better keep the conversation going, or that some time perhaps elapsed and the topic came up again. So Lavan says to him, you tell me what you want me to pay you, and I'll pay you. In other words, same thing he said before. Remember, back 14 years ago, it was Yaakov who volunteered to say, here's the terms. So Lavan never sets terms. It's Yaakov who seems to be setting terms at the beginning of each of their deals. Yeah, again, notice that Lavan changes the terms in the middle and makes him work 14 years instead of 7 years. But we're going to see a similar pattern as we go through this story. Vayomer Elav. Yaakov gives him the following answer. You know how hard I've worked for you. And how carefully I've watched your sheep, your flock. The little bit that you had before I got here, has now become a huge multitude. Hashem has blessed you liragli, as I've been here, during the time I've been here. Notice Yaakov just says liragli. He doesn't say biglali, for my sake. Lavan said biglalecha. I see that Hashem has blessed me because of you. Yaakov just says, well, I see Hashem has blessed you while I've been here. He doesn't want to take credit for the blessing. But he says, now that I see that because of while I've been here, Hashem has blessed you, Mataya said, I got to take care of my own household too. I'm very good. I'm very happy that I made you a fortune. Now I got to make my own fortune. But Yomer Lavan says, no, wait a minute. No, I'm not letting you go so fast. What can I give you that to make you stay? But Yomer Yaakov said, you don't have to give me anything. If you'll do this for me, Ashuva, I will return. Eretz oncha, I will watch your sheep, Eshmor, and I will stay here. I will stay here as your shepherd. What do I want you to do? I want you to go through the whole flock today. Haser misham, remove from there kolsen nakod v'talu, any sheep that is either dotted or spotted, v'cholseh chum b'ksavim, and any sheep that has any spots of brown among the ksavim, among the sheep, v'talu v'nakod b'izim, or if it has again spots or dots among the goats, v'yaschari, and that will be my payment. Whatever you remove from the flock, that will be what I take as my pay. And therefore, you'll be able to see my righteousness tomorrow. When you look at the part that I've taken as my payment, whoever doesn't fit those criteria, must have been something I stole. So he's saying, I want you to take these aside and that will be my reward. Now, Rashi interprets this differently. He interprets this as saying, what Yaakov is saying, that in the future, I want you to remove all these sheep that have these specific markings, but in the future, any that are born with that color, that will be my reward. That will be my salary going forward, as opposed to what has already been there being my salary. So there's two different ways of looking at this, and the Parshanim go both ways on it. Lavan says, great idea, Louis, fine, great, I accept the deal, perfect. So what does he do? All the sheep that fit this criteria are removed from the sheep, and he gives this to the hands of his sons. Now the question here is, who's the Vayasar? Who is the one who is removing these sheep from the flock? Is it Yaakov or is it Lavan? And whose sons are they being given to? Lavan's sons or Yaakov's sons? Great question. Pashnim seem to imply that these are given to Lavan's sons, and they are being removed from the flock so that they can no longer influence the new sheep being born. And that was the deal. Vayasem derech shlosha jamim beino vein Yaakov. He puts a distance of 3 days between himself and Yaakov. The Yaakov ro'et so Lavan hanotarot, and Yaakov is shepherding the rest of Lavan's flock. Then Yaakov goes and takes these sticks. I think we're all familiar pretty much with the story. He takes the stick and he makes it speckled colors, and he puts them to the watering troughs where the sheep are watering. And all the sheep that are born fit the criteria that Yaakov said, and he separates them, and they become his. Lo shatam al tzom Lavan. He does not place them with Lavan's flock. And again, Yaakov would do this every time the stronger sheep would be bearing of the bearing season. He would put them there, and but when the weaker sheep were in their mating period, he wouldn't. The weaker sheep would go to Lavan, but the stronger sheep would go to Yaakov. And the man became very, very spread out. He had lots of sheep, and with the sheep he sold, he bought maidservants, manservants, camels, donkeys. So Yaakov makes it here. Okay, the period of time goes by, and Yaakov is going through all of this. He's not only watching his own flocks, but he's watching Lavan's flocks, and both of them seem to be doing very, very nice. Okay, again, notice he's making sure that Lavan gets some sheep also, making sure that Lavan's flock are also increasing. He's not only taking care of himself, he's also taking care of Lavan's flock. So you got to remember that he's not only taking care of his own investments, he's taking care of his father-in-law's investments too. However, we now see the next verse. Again, what happens? Lavan's sons become very jealous. He overhears them saying that, hey, Yaakov has made this huge fortune off of us. These are all our sheep. These should all belong to us. Yaakov's made this huge fortune on stuff that really should belong to us. Where have we heard that story before? Where will we hear it? We've heard it throughout history. Okay, this is a very, very similar, familiar refrain. We heard it last week with Yitzchak and Avimelech. We had the same story. That the Plishtim told Yitzchak, leave because you've taken all of this territory that we couldn't grow anything, but somehow you've managed to make a fortune on our territory, on our land, on our whatever. Same thing, same story here. Yaakov now sees his face of Lavan. He sees already that he's falling out of favor with Lavan. It's not the same relationship we used to have when I was just working for him only, not working part for him and part for myself. Our relationship seems to have changed. Now we have a very key phrase in the whole story. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Kadosh Baruch Hu shows up and speaks to Yaakov. Vayomer Hashem el Yaakov. Hashem tells Yaakov, Shuv el eretz avotecha u'lemoladetecha. It's time to go home. Vayemach, but I will be with you. Very, very interesting point. Remember, this is preceded by the fact that the Torah telling us that Yaakov's relationship with Lavan is starting to go south, and then suddenly Hashem shows up and tells Yaakov it's time to go home. Vayishlach Yaakov, so Yaakov, upon hearing this message from Hashem, he sends, Vayikra Rachel u'Leah sadel tzono. He calls Rachel and Leah out, and he speaks to them outside in the field, where presumably there's more likelihood of seeing if anybody's listening. Clearly, this is supposed to be a private conversation, not intended to be overheard. When you're in a house, you can't always tell who's listening. When you're in a built-up area, you can't always tell who's listening. Presumably, if you're out in the field with the sheep, it's a lot easier to see if there's anybody listening. At least that's what the Parshatim say, why it's Hasadeh El Tzono, and why the Torah emphasizes that point. It emphasizes the point that there are conversations that we have to make sure that nobody's listening. Now, Yaakov, a very, very long dialogue here between Yaakov and his wife. Vayomer Elohem, Yaakov says, Ro'eh Anochi. He starts very interestingly. Ro'eh Anochi et pnei avicha kinenu elayki kol shel. I see that your father's relationship, our relationship, is not the same way it used to be. And interestingly, almost parenthetically, oh, by the way, God, my father also had a word to say with. Now, I would have thought, Hashem tells you go home. First thing you say to your wives is, God says it's time to go for me to go home. So let's pack up and go. But that's not the way Yaakov phrases it. It's very interesting. He starts with the fact that, hey, your father's relationship with us not the same as it was. And you know more than anybody else. You know that I've put my entire body and soul into working for your father. Your father wasn't straight with me. And he changed my salary requirement, salary 10 monim, not 10 times, but 10 times 10 times. Rashi brings down that monim is a minimum of 10 times. So 100 times in a course of a few years, Yaakov and Lavan has changed the conditions every time, trying to figure out how I can make the conditions more favorable. Obviously, Lavan wants conditions that are more favorable to him, despite the fact that when Yaakov first proposed the original conditions, Lavan said, great, those are great terms, I accept them right away. Interestingly enough. And by the way, same thing we saw with the first story with the two daughters. But it's only the hand of Hashem that has kept him from doing evil to me. And Yaakov elaborates. If your father said this characteristic will be what you get paid, then all the sheep that were born had that characteristic. Everybody was akudim. In other words, Hashem made it so that whatever Lavan agreed to be the terms, that's what the sheep were born. Hashem has saved or set aside a portion of the sheep of your father and given them to me. Now, interestingly enough, Yaakov continues. I would have thought that would be enough. It's time to go home. Why don't you finish up? Why this long dialogue? And behold, Yaakov says to his wives, the time when the sheep were giving birth, I would lift up my eyes and I saw a dream. Look, all of the sheep that were being born were either spotted, speckled, whatever the right criteria was. And an angel of God spoke to me in this dream, and he said, Yaakov, he called me, and I said, here I am. And the angel says to me, raise your eyes and see all of the sheep that are being born. They're whatever criteria has been set. Because Hashem, have seen, the angel is saying, of course, the name of Hashem, I've seen what Lavan is trying to do to you. I am the God of Beit El, that you dedicated this monument to, and you made an oath that you would come home. Now it's time. It's time to go home. So Yaakov finishes this long, impassioned plea to his wives. They answer and they say to him, do we have any reason, any hope for getting an inheritance that we should stay in our father's house? He treated us as strangers because he sold us. And not only did he sell us, but he ate the profits from the sale. We're gone already. Basically, they say, thank you, wonderful, we're ready to go. So what does Yaakov do in the next pasuk? Immediately, Vayakam Yaakov, he gets up, he puts all his sons and wives on camels. When he leaves with all of his flocks, all of his possessions, all of the possessions that he bought by selling all his sheep, that he has now come into possession while he was in Padan Aram, to return to go to his father Yitzchak in the land of Canaan. Now, Lavan halach ligzozet sono. The Torah tells us that Lavan had gone to his sheep shearing. It was sheep shearing season. He had gone to his sheep shearing. But tignov Rachel et trafim asher liavia. Rachel steals some trafim that belong to her father. How we translate trafim? Great question. They were either some types of well, one opinion says they were idols. One opinion says they were talismans. One opinion says they were amulets. Whatever they were. Now, interestingly enough, throughout this whole story, we've called him Lavan. Suddenly it says, "Vayignov Yaakov et lev Lavan ha'arami." Yaakov steals the heart of Lavan the Arami. Again, this is where he's called Arami. Why? How did he steal his heart? Al belihi gidlo, because he did not tell him that he was leaving Kivarechu, that he was running away. In other words, because Lavan is at this sheep shearing festival, Yaakov is able to leave without announcement. He leaves. Vayivrach, literally he runs away. Hu v'chol asher lo, he and all that belong to him. Vayakam vayavor hanohar, and he gets up and he crosses the river. Vayasim et panav hara Gilad, and he turns in the direction of Hara Gilad. That's where he's heading to. He's heading, in other words, westward back to Eretz Yisrael. Which Nahar are they referring to? Gershon asked. I'm assuming Han-Nahar is the Euphrates, generally because Haran was, some were situated between the Tigris and the Euphrates. So I'm assuming the Euphrates is the one that's closer to us. Therefore, he would have crossed that to get back. He would have already. And that's in the Torah, that is the one that is referred to. Nahar. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Han-Nahar is generally the Euphrates. Okay, but you got Lavan Bayom Ashlishi. Lavan finds out on the third day, Kivarach Yaakov, that Yaakov has run away. And he takes some of his brothers with him. And he chases after Yaakov derech shivat yamim, a distance of a normal 7-day journey. And he overtakes him, or he reaches him at Har Gilad. He catches up to him. And even though it says derech shivat yamim, it didn't take. It took Yaakov 7 days to get from where he was to Har Gilad. It didn't take Lavan as much. Obviously, he didn't find out until the third day, so he covers the distance a lot faster than Yaakov. Obviously, Lavan is traveling with a small band of people, of him and his brothers or whoever's come with him, whereas Yaakov's traveling with his whole entourage of sheep and cattle and goats and camels. So he's and children. So he's traveling a lot slower. Again, this night, again, he catches up to him. He camps at Har Gilad, as we're going to see in the next verse. But Hashem comes to Lavan in a dream. Vayomer lo, and Hashem says to him, "Shomer lecha, be wary. Pentadaberim Yaakov mitov adra. Don't speak to Yaakov either good or bad." And the Parshanim want to understand what is mitov adra. Rashi very, very interestingly brings a comment that says, Tov, when Rashi says something that he thinks is Tov, it's Ra, it's not good for you anyway. So even if he had said something he thought was good, Ramban wants to say, Mitov Adra, don't offer him any positive incentives to come back home. Don't say you're going to harm him if he doesn't come. Don't make any threats because he's not coming back. Hashem basically has told Lavan that no matter what you say to Yaakov, he's continuing home. He's not coming back to work for you anymore. That's what Hashem tells him, at least according to Ramban. Vayaseg Lavan, and Yaakov, he said, Lavan has reached, caught up to Yaakov. Yaakov tokad halo bahar, the Lavan tokad achav Har Gilad. They're both camped on opposite sides of this mountain. The next morning, presumably, it seems that the next morning, or perhaps late, immediately when he gets there, because it has to be the next day, because otherwise he hasn't had the dream yet. So presumably the next morning when they get up, Lavan overtakes Yaakov, and he says to Yaakov, Me'asita, what have you done? And you stole my heart. You treated my daughters like captives in a war. Why did you hide and run away? And you stole me. You stole my feelings. Why didn't you tell me you wanted to go home? I would have sent you with joy and song and musical instruments, musical accompaniments. You didn't even give me the opportunity to give a hug and say goodbye to my sons, and sons meaning grandsons and daughters. I tell you, so what you've done is inappropriate. Now, very interestingly, if I stop here again, what's our take on Lavan? He's absolutely justified. Dave says he's just upset, but he's absolutely justified. What father-in-law or grandfather or father and grandfather wants his kids to run away without saying goodbye? Or even if they have to go home, fine. I want to leave on good terms. I don't want to leave that they feel like they have to run away. So clearly, again, there are points in the story. If we pause the story, stop and look at Lavan, he seems to be the injured party here. He seems to get a raw deal from Chazal. But the next verse might be a little bit different. There is in my power to do harm to you. Okay, so the fact that he says this, remember, he says he has the power to do you harm, that already says, wait a minute, you don't say that necessarily, that's already threatening. But he says, why am I not going to do you any harm? The God of your fathers appeared to me last night and told me, be very careful, don't speak to Yaakov good or bad. So he says, even though I could have harmed you, I'm not going to because God told me not. So again, is that negative, positive? I'm not so sure. I understand that you went. I understand you had this, you really wanted to get home already. It was 20 years. You told me 6 years ago you wanted to go home already. But he said, asked the following question, why did you steal my God? Why did you steal my God? So again, at least from Lavan's perspective, these trafim are clearly an Elohah, are clearly some type of power, have some type of power to it. So Yaakov, now having heard Lavan's argument, answers the following. What? It was Rachel. Yeah, but Lavan doesn't know. Lavan knows that they're missing. He knows that somebody stole them. Obviously, he stopped off at home long enough to know they were missing. Why did he stop off at home and know they were missing? Presumably because they were something he used in his divination, and he wanted to divine where Yaakov was, and he couldn't do it as well without these trafim. So he needed them. They were his, magical instruments for whatever, and that's how he knew they were gone, because he was having trouble figuring out. So he had to ask the local populace, hey, did you see which way Yaakov went? Presumably he had to find out through other means. So Yaakov now answers. Again, notice, as I said, how much of this is, there's a lot of dialogue here. That's why I just wanted to focus on this whole thing. Vayan Yaakov, Vayaytzay Lavan. Yaakov answers Lavan. And remember, Lavan said two things. Number one, why did you leave? And two, why did you steal my gods? So he says, the reason I left secretly is Kiyareti, because I was afraid. Kiyamarti, because I said to myself, Pentik Zolet Binotecha Me'imi. You will not allow me to leave with my wives and children because they're your daughters. You're going to say, hey, they're mine. I don't want to let you leave. And I wanted to leave with my family, not alone. Even though I came alone, I want to leave now with my family. That's the answer to question one you asked me. Why didn't I tell you? Because I was afraid that you were going to make a stand and not let me go. Gershom.
Didn't he acquire his wives from labor? I mean, in that world,
Gershom's question is, didn't he acquire his wives by labor? And that's the way the world went then. Yes, absolutely. The answer to that is yes, absolutely. That is why Yaakov feels justified in leaving and taking them with him. They're his wives, they're his kids. No question about that. But Yaakov's words, let's read his words. Ki yareti, because I was afraid, ki amarti, that you would say, what? Pentigzol, you're going to steal your daughters back. Okay, he was concerned that Lavan was going to keep him, forcibly keep him from taking his daughters, even though exactly as you said, he already owned them. They're his wives now. They are still biologically Lavan's daughters, but they're no longer his possession. They're no longer under his authority. He has given that authority and sold that authority to Yaakov. And yes, that is the way it works in this world. That a daughter is sold, absolutely. Okay. But that's the answer to his first question. Is I was afraid that even though, notice he used the word tikzol. He doesn't say tikachet b'notecha. He says tikzol. You're going to steal your daughters back. Okay. Now the answer to the second question, he says, Stole something? What do you mean I stole something? I don't know anything what you're talking about. So he says, whoever you can find your gods with will not live. Now but he challenges Lavan. He says, in front of everybody, I want you to acknowledge and find what I have in my whole entourage that belongs to you, and take it. You can take it back. And then parenthetically, the Torah adds, obviously, v'lo yada Yaakov ki Rachel genavatam. Yaakov did not know that Rachel had stolen them, because had he did that, he certainly wouldn't have sentenced her to death. Okay? But he said that's the story, and that's what's going to happen. Okay? Vayaytzay Lavan. So now Lavan has to, obviously, in order to find the stolen goods, Lavan has to conduct a 10-to-10 search. Vayaytzay Lavan be'ol Yaakov. He goes into Yaakov's tent. He goes into Leah's tent. Ol shtei mahot, the tent that belonged to the two maidservants, Bill and Zilpah, v'lo matzah. He didn't find anything. He hasn't found a thing that would belong to him yet. Vayaytzay me'ol Leah, vayavo b'ol Rachel. And he exits Leah's tent and enters Rachel's tent. The Rachel had taken the trafim, these trafim that are the whole discussion here. But to see Maiman, she had placed them b'char hagamal in either the saddle or the saddle bag of her camel. Vateshiv aleim, and she sat on them. So she's sitting on the camel. Well, because he went into the tent, she wanted to allow him to go into the tent. She moved him outside, and she was sitting on the camel waiting for him to leave the tent. Obviously, he searched the tent and didn't find anything. So what does she say? Now, interestingly, she volunteers. She says to her father, please forgive me, because I can't get up and give you proper respect because I'm sitting on this camel. It's that time of the month. And so he searches for Trofim, and obviously he doesn't find Trofim. Why? Because she's sitting on them. And that seems to be what Torah wants to start. Now, Lavan comes back to where Yaakov issued his challenge, and he's empty-handed. He has not found a single thing that belongs to him in all of Yaakov's possessions, or any of his wives' possessions, or any of his children's. Nothing. Yaakov really just loses it seems. Gets upset. Yaakov Lavan. And now we're going to be long, again, for the Torah, very long monologue here. Yaakov Lavan. Yaakov says to Lavan, Ma pishi, what is my sin? Ma chatasi, how have I sinned to you? Ki dalakta acharai, that you chased after me. Ki mishashtu et kol kelai, you've now searched all of my possessions. What have you found from anything that belongs to you? Simko, place it right here, in front of my brothers, your brothers, in front of everybody. And they should reach a conclusion between the two of us. Now Yaakov unloads on Lavan. I've been here for 20 years. Your female sheep, your male goats, none were lost. I didn't eat any of your sheep. I didn't bring you any sheep that were torn by predators. I would accept the loss. I would pay you for anything. You would come to me and say, hey, this is the number of sheep I'm supposed to have. If I'm missing, you would collect it from me. Genufti yom, whether it was stolen by day, or genufti laila, whether it was stolen by night. I was responsible for all the sheep, and I took that responsibility, and it was done. Even though during the day the heat and the drought ate me up, and the coldness at night, I had very little sleep. This has been 20 years I've been in your house. Notice he emphasizes this 20 years twice. I worked for you 14 years for your two daughters. 6 years it took me to acquire all of these sheep. And you changed my salary 10 times, 100 times. You changed my salary. Were it not for were it not for the fact that God was with me, Ki atare kam shilachtani. If you'd have had your choice, you would have sent me out empty-handed. Et onivi et yigia kapai ro Elohim vayochaf hamesh. It was the toil and my effort that Hashem saw, and that's how he decided. That's why he gave you that rebuke last night. So Lavan is going to answer. So Yaakov again said, "Hey, you didn't find anything." He unloads on him. So again, if you look at this, you're trying to say who's the injured party here? Is it Yaakov? Is it Lavan? Vayan Lavan vayomer Yaakov. Lavan answers, "Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Hold on. Wait a second. Habanot benotai. The daughters that you're talking about, they're my daughters. Abanim, the sons you're talking about, they're banai. Aren't they my grandchildren also? Yeah, they may be your children, but they're my grandchildren. But Sony, the sheep, they start out as my sheep. Everything that you call now is yours, it all originates from me. Believe no tie. However, to my daughters, what should I would do? What am I going to do harm to them? I'm going to harm my children, my grandchildren. So therefore, let's make a treaty here. We're on the same team here. Why are you angry? Why are we fighting? Let's make a covenant. And it will be a witness between the two of us. Yaakov says, okay, great idea. And he takes a stone, and he turns it into a monument. Then he tells his brothers, which really is the sons, because he doesn't have any brothers here. The only brother he has is Esav, who we haven't seen in this week's parsha. Lead to Avanim, collect some stones. They collected stones and they made a pile of stones. And they ate a meal there on the stones together. Presumably, Yaakov and his entourage, Lavan and his entourage, they sit down and break bread together. Universal symbol of peace is breaking bread. They eat a meal together. Lavan gives the name of this place Yigar Sahaduta, which, by the way, Rashi tells us is the only two Aramaic words in the entire Torah. Yigar Sahaduta, which literally means in Hebrew Gal'ed, the pile of rocks that are a witness. Yaakov Krolo Gal'ed, Yaakov gives it the Hebrew name of Gal'ed. Vayomer Lavan, and Lavan said, Hagal hazeh eit ben you ben chayom. This pile of stones that we've just erected will be a witness between me and you for going forth from today. That's why they call its name Gal'ed. The Torah says, and this is obviously it's some overlook. Yitzef Hashem ben you ben Echa. So they symbolically made it at an overlook, so that to say that Hashem, because I am going my way, you're going your way. We're going our separate ways after today. I'm going back home to my home in Haran. You are going back to your home in Eretz Canaan. We're now parting. This is the parting of the ways, Lavan says. But don't think that Hashem isn't watching over us. If you will afflict my daughters, or take more wives in addition to my daughters, this covenant is null and void. God is my witness. So basically, Lavan says, I'm okay with you, but I don't want you taking more wives because I want you to take care of my daughters and my grandchildren. That's all that matters to me right now. I understand you're going your way, but I want you to make sure you take care of them. Again, if you look at Lavan right now, he seems like a nice guy, right? Okay, this will be a witness. This monument and this pile of stones will bear witness that I'm not going to cross to you to wage war against you, and you're not going to cross over to wage war against me. Elohei Avraham, and there we are again. I told you Nachor was going to show up at the end of the parsha. Elohei Nachor, Yishbetu Beinenu. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nachor judge between us. Elohei Avraham, Elohei Avihem, the God of their fathers. By Yeshua Yaakov, and Yaakov swore that he accepted this. B'fachad aviv Yitzchak, in the name of the God of his father Yitzchak. And then by Yisbach Yaakov Zevach Bar, he kills some animals. Again, he calls everybody to eat. And they have a meal and they go to the next day. They sleep, have a good night's sleep. And the parasha basically ends with Vayash came Lavan Babok. Actually, there's two more psukim after that, but Lavan gets up the next morning. Vayinashek Levanav leave no tav. Vayivarech eten. He kisses his sons, meaning his grandsons, his daughters, meaning his daughters and his granddaughter. Vayivarech etem, and he blesses them. Vayelech Vayoshav Lavan Limkamo, and he goes home. So again, if we look at the story overall, again, as I said at the beginning, three different things. We have thought, we have words, we have action. If I look at Lavan's actions, on the whole, they seem pretty normal, pretty okay. Perhaps he's a little bit not the greatest boss to work for. He likes to change salaries frequently, likes to change conditions frequently. He likes to create new covenants and new things that you didn't sign up for at the beginning, but he adds that on to you. And perhaps he likes to blame it on the people of his town that, oh, well, I can't give the younger daughter for the older daughter to get another 7 years of work out of you. Okay, perhaps he's a little shady in his business dealings, perhaps. And by the way, there's a school among the Parshanim that says, by the way, the reason that Rachel was the shepherdess is because A, he didn't have sons at the time, and B, he couldn't hire a shepherd because nobody trusted him, nobody wanted to have any business dealings whatsoever with him. But again, that's sort of after we've seen what happened with him and Yaakov, that he's kind of a little, okay, so he's a little shady in the business. But again, to say that, as the Balagoda wants to say, and as Rashi quotes this, Rashi says, Arami Oved Avi, that Lavan wanted to destroy all of Am Yisrael, is really based on these two psukim that where he says, Yesh le'el yadi lasoti machem ra. I have the power to harm you, and the fact that Hashem has to warn him, Midaber Yaakov mitov ad ra. That seems to be the legacy of Lavan is based on those two. Now we have to understand that Lavan, just like Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, are ancestors of all of Am Yisrael, so is Lavan. Lavan is the grandfather of all of the Shvatim. We are all descended from one of those Shvatim. Lavan is their grandfather, just like Yitzchak is their grandfather and Yaakov is their father. So we have to understand that sometimes we have to take a deeper look. And Chazal want us to take a deeper look into Lavan to say that not necessarily did he want to physically destroy Am Yisrael. Okay, clearly he didn't. But Lavan wanted perhaps, and this is what Chazal really is alluding to, he wanted to spiritually destroy Am Yisrael by keeping them out of Eretz Yisrael. He wanted Yaakov to come back. He wanted them to stay in Haran. And Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, could never have recognized our destiny as the Am of Hashem had we stayed in Haran. That's why Avram has to leave, and that's why Yaakov, even though he goes back, has to ultimately leave. And that, when Chazal tell us that Arami Ovi, Lavan wanted to destroy Yaakov, it doesn't mean necessarily physically. So I think the lesson really of the parasha and of that little keta that I started with is that not all of our enemies are trying to destroy us physically. We also have to be very, very wary, at least equally, if not more wary of those who are trying to destroy us spiritually. Because if we look at it on the face of it, they seem to be perfectly fine people. They seem to bear us no ill will, but in the back of their minds, they are trying insidiously to wean us away from God, to cause us to leave the Torah, leave the mitzvot. That's a much greater danger, despite the fact that right now, today, if I look at the world, it seems that perhaps we're back to the physical danger, but the spiritual danger is a much more pervasive one and a much more dangerous one. And I think that's really one of the lessons that the Torah wants us to get from, and why it elaborates so much on this story of Lavan and Yaakov, to let us read that we can't just read the lines, we have to read between the lines and understand what's going on beneath the surface in order to truly understand who our enemies really are. And when we're able to understand our enemies, then we can realize what they're trying to do so that we can counteract them. And we can strengthen ourselves in our awareness of Torah, in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and ultimately we will be zocheh that Hashem should hear our tefillot, and we should be zocheh to kula shleima meher v'yameinu. Thank you all. I apologize for the length. Questions, comments, feedback at this point. David, you got a question?
Yeah.
David,
are we to assume from this that when Jacob was sent away to find a wife right at the beginning, that he was left to find a wife without an accompanying dowry to give when he finds a wife?
Great question. Okay. David's question, for those who were in the room, basically is, why didn't Yaakov have a nice dowry to give his wife? What was he doing with no dowry to give her? That's a great question. Presumably, if Yitzchak sent him away to find a wife, he obviously provided a dowry, because if we look back, and as a matter of fact, Rashi mentions that when Eliezer arrives at probably the same exact well years earlier, something like 97 years earlier, he had 10 camels with full of stuff and gifts to give to Rivka, to her family, or to the prospective bride in her family. So clearly they would have sent Yaakov with a dowry. Why didn't he have it when he got there? Great question. The Medrash asks the question and tries to give an answer, and it tells us the following. Esav decided that he said he was going to kill Yaakov. So who does he dispatch to kill Yaakov? His oldest son, Eliphaz, is dispatched to kill Yaakov. Eliphaz overtakes Yaakov, and Yaakov has a little conversation with him, and Eliphaz says, hey, I got to listen to my father. He said, I got to kill you, so I got to kill you. Yaakov says, I got a better idea. Take all my possessions, because a poor person is considered like they're dead. So you'll fulfill your father's purpose, and you won't have my blood on your hands. You'll only have made me poor. So that's why he comes, when he arrives in the well, he's empty-handed. He's given everything he has to Eliphaz, so that Eliphaz doesn't have to kill him, but he's metaphorically killed him in a way that he's fulfilled his father's command. Okay, that's the Midrash. That's the way the Midrash deals with the question of why he didn't have anything. I would tend to suspect, if I didn't have that Midrash, I would have said the reason he didn't have anything was basically because he was running away from Esav. He didn't want to be laden down with anything. And as a matter of fact, Rashi wants to suggest that the reason, having drawn his conclusion as to who Lavan really is, says that the reason when Yaakov first gets it, Lavan hugs him and kisses him, is he wants to see whether he's hiding a money belt or a nice jewelry belt around his waist, rather than having carried, tangible goods like camels and food and whatever. You think is, well, maybe he's got it all in precious jewels or what's the word I'm trying to think of, currency or monetary goods, rather than and he's buying his stuff on the way rather than starting out with everything. Okay, but as I said, it's a great question. Any other questions, comments?
Thanks for that, and great shiur.
Any other questions, comments, or feedback? Thank you all. And as I said, I apologize for the length. Have a good evening. Have a good rest of the week.